accessibility and inclusion across the country. It's also Red Shirt Day. And so I, like many others across the country, are wearing red this afternoon and throughout the day in support of Canadians living with disabilities. I am thrilled to be joined this afternoon, and you'll be hearing from both Michelle Hewitt from Disability Without Poverty, Senator Pate, as well as Senator Petitclerc. It's really thanks to organizations including Disability Without Poverty, March of Dimes, Easter Seals Canada, Stopgap Ottawa, BC Disability, the Canadian Labour Congress, and Inclusion Canada because of their advocacy. As a result, the governing party has now placed legislation for a Canada Disability benefit on the notice paper, which means it could be reintroduced as early as Friday of this week. But we need to be careful. We've been here before. A bill was introduced last June, days before the House rose, only to die on the order paper when an election was called. And so to be clear, the only difference between today and really a year ago is that now there's no looming election and an opportunity to move forward to see the Canada Disability benefit finally, years after it was first promised, to see this realized. This time, though, the government must demonstrate that they're committed to following through and not simply to making empty promises. Today, we're calling on the governing party to follow through on the promise they made in their 2020 throne speech and their 2021 election platform, to ensure that this legislation, after a year of consultation, is more substantial than the previous bill introduced this time last year, that the Canada Disability benefit follows principles that have been advocated by the disability community, including indexing to the disability cost of living, ensuring there are no clawbacks, having a simple and accessible application process, and ensuring those already eligible for other disability benefits at all levels of government are eligible for the Canada Disability benefit. We also call them to work collaboratively with provinces and territories to ensure that this is a net benefit from coast to coast to coast for Canadians with disabilities. And finally, to demonstrate that they are committed to ensuring the benefit is funded without delay as early as the fall economic statement. This is life or death for so many across the country, as folks with Canadians with disabilities across the country continue to call on parliamentarians to get this done without delay. So it's my pleasure to introduce now Michelle Hewitt from Disability Without Poverty, who drafted a petition I was proud to sponsor, attracting over almost 18,000 signatures from coast to coast to coast. Michelle.
Thank you, Mike, for inviting Disability Without Poverty to join you at this press conference and for all you do in solidarity with disabled people. The Canada Disability benefit is a much needed step to lift disabled people out of poverty. Legislation was tabled last June, but the election meant that it did not progress. Since then, the situation has grown worse for over 1.4 million disabled people living in poverty. Inflation is at 7%, and disability assistance payments are frozen way below the poverty line. We are excited that the government announced the Canada Disability Benefit Bill is being tabled again, maybe as early as Friday. Disabled people need action now and are ready and willing to work alongside the government to get the job done. We implore them to follow up tabling the bill by fast-tracking this legislation so that the funds get into the hands of disabled people who desperately need them. When Parliament goes on summer recess, poverty does not take a break. Thank you.
Merci, merci beaucoup. Merci beaucoup. Merci beaucoup, Mike. Merci beaucoup, Michel. Merci à tous, à toutes qui font partie de ceux et celles qui veulent pousser le plus possible pour que cette prestation canadienne des personnes handicapées prenne enfin vie, soit enfin une mesure concrète dont vont bénéficier les 20 les 22 de personnes en situation de handicap au Canada, dont je fais partie. Aujourd'hui, donc, je prends brièvement la parole avec deux chapeaux. Le chapeau, bien sûr, de personnes qui vivent en situation de handicap et qui, depuis l'âge de mes 13 ans, et donc depuis ce temps, j'ai vu, bien sûr, le Canada comme pays qui, de plus en plus, prend la défense des personnes en situation de handicap, donne des outils nécessaires aux personnes en situation de handicap. Mais la réalité, et on l'a tous et toutes constaté durant cette grande pandémie de la COVID, c'est que il n'y a pas assez qui est fait. Il reste des failles, il reste des lacunes, il reste des tragédies qui se vivent chaque jour ici au Canada pour les personnes qui vivent en situation de handicap. Et ça a toujours été inacceptable. On le sait plus que jamais. On ne peut pas se cacher en disant qu'on n'a pas les chiffres, on n'a pas les preuves, on n'a pas les données. On les a et il faut passer à l'action. Je prends aussi la parole en tant que sénatrice depuis maintenant 6 ans pour dire que, bien sûr, au Sénat, on a cette responsabilité de se préoccuper, de passer à l'action quand il s'agit des personnes les plus vulnérables au Canada. Et bien entendu, les personnes en situation de handicap en font partie. Donc, c'est mon message peut-être pour dire au gouvernement, depuis 1 an maintenant, on attend la réintroduction de ce projet de loi. On a espoir que peut-être ce sera concrétisé ou enfin le départ sera lancé, peut-être même d'ici vendredi. Et ce serait mon message pour dire, vivement que ce soit fait, vivement aussi qu'on le fasse concrètement, qu'on le fasse bien, qu'on le fasse vite, parce que c'est important, parce que les personnes en situation de handicap ne peuvent plus attendre. Et je dirais aussi que nous, au Sénat, on est prêts à travailler fort, à recevoir ce projet de loi dans les plus brefs délais et que partout, dans chaque groupe au Sénat, on a des sénateurs qui sont engagés et qui vont faire ce travail bien, rapidement, concrètement. Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup, mon ami et sénatrice collègue. The Canada Disability was promised, as has already been said, but is yet to be provided. And meanwhile, too many of the 1 in 5 Canadians who live with disabilities face economic marginalization because of long-standing discrimination and exclusion that the pandemic, as Senatrice Petitclerc has just underscored, has deepened and entrenched. In recent weeks, we've heard horrific reports of individuals with disabilities seeking out medical assistance and dying because they are unable to access vital housing, health, social, and economic supports. The decision to inadequately fund social and disability assistance programs are policy choices, and we must demand an end to legislated poverty and an end to policies that abandon people to poverty. The government promised to implement a Canada Disability Benefit, like the child benefit and the GIS for seniors. Such a benefit could provide a form of basic income in the case for those who have disabilities. It could better ensure that people receive the supports they need to live their lives. This legislation must be introduced without delay. We're very happy to hear it's on the order paper. We must work together to eradicate poverty and redress long-standing systemic inequalities. We all benefit in countless human, social, and economic ways when all, not merely the most privileged, have the means to participate fully and contribute to the overall well-being of families, communities, and the economy. Let's get this done.
Thanks very much first to Mike for helping organize this and senators for joining. I think core point I want to make is, one, this is going to make such a difference in the lives of people with disabilities, and in this Parliament in particular, where we have an opportunity to work across party lines and across chambers. And this is an example today of that. But we have an opportunity, and you think back to a minority parliament where there was cooperation, and you think back to the Pearson years, and what did? They developed a long-standing social policy, the Guaranteed Income Supplement, old age security, that has stood the test of time such that when you look at poverty rates in this country, one of the lowest poverty rates we have among demographics is among seniors. And unfortunately, the opposite is true of people with disabilities. One of the highest poverty rates we have in this country is people with disabilities. And here we have an opportunity in this Parliament to work across party lines, design a social policy that will stand the test of time. So when we wake up decades from now, we will say one of the lowest poverty rates we have is people with disabilities. And there's an opportunity to support across party lines. And what we really need is this legislation to be seen through and then ambitious action in the next budget. And I'm actually really thankful today because we've seen the legislation put on notice. We've heard from the minister, who, by the way, is one of the greatest champions for this legislation, but for this idea in the House of Commons. And we have an opportunity to see this through in a serious way now that the government has committed to tabling the legislation before we rise at the end of June. And so I'm very thankful for that commitment. I'm very thankful for the action. It's a really important promise for us to see through. And it's our job, I think, in working across party lines to ensure that we support Minister Qualtrough's efforts, to ensure that when we realize this promise, that we realize it in the most ambitious way possible that will make the greatest difference for people with disabilities. Thanks so much.
Thank you, MP Erskine-Smith, Senator Pate, Senatrice Petitclerc, and Michelle as well. We'd be happy to take any questions at this time.
And we'll take one question online. Palak Manga, please go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
We can, yes.
Hi, thanks for taking our questions. My first one is for Ms. Hewitt, but I think Senator Pate, you may have referenced it as well. Obviously, we know that this benefit has long been asked for. We obviously see it now in the notice paper. But we also saw, I believe yesterday, the BC Ombudsperson highlight that the way that some of these benefits are doled out is also critical. Can you speak to maybe about what that case, I believe was involving an Indigenous girl, what that might highlight, how significant it is to sort of get support out the door ASAP so it doesn't, I guess, languish for years, and essentially what kind of safeguards you want to see in this new bill to ensure that doesn't happen?
Hi, thank you very much for the question. I think yesterday's announcements from the Attorney General were shocking to most of us, but no surprise to disabled people. Access to benefits, the way that eligibility, the way that they're means tested, and just the way that our most marginalized people, the people who live at the intersections of race and religion and disability and age, are able to access benefits in this country. I think it is absolutely crucial that the government acts on this quickly. I think it was also Senator Pate that referenced MAID, and on Monday I had the honor of being a witness to the special joint committee on MAID that's going on at the moment, where I was able to speak to people, disabled people who have accessed MAID because of societal reasons, because of poverty, not because of their medical condition. This is the state of our country at the moment for disabled people, and this is why the Canada Disability Benefit is so crucial to lifting disabled people. Well, we hope at least to the poverty line, because the poverty line is no great place to live. We want disabled people to be able to have the capacity to show Canada everything that they bring to this country. And at the moment, the burden of poverty is too great.
Thank you very much for the question, and thank you for that very important contribution. I would say that the Auditor General reports yesterday underscore what we know all too well, and as Senatrice Petitclerc pointed out, one of the reasons that a number of us accepted as Senate appointments is our responsibility to act for those who often are not as able to influence because of their lack of relative privilege, those who are elected. And I think what those Auditor General reports pointed to yesterday is we're talking about people who don't tend to have the resources, the power, the opportunity to influence public policy in the ways that we now have the privilege and responsibility that goes along with it to do so. And so I think it behooves us, and I'm very, very pleased that there are members of Parliament who are very keen to do this. I don't think there's any member of Parliament who wouldn't recognize work needs to be done on these issues. Are they vote getters, though? And if they're not, then we have a responsibility, I would suggest, as senators who are part of the Chamber of Sober Second Thought, to be pushing as hard as possible to ensure that we have the kinds of protections in place that breathe life into the equality provisions of our Charter and our human rights legislation.
Thanks, Senator. Can I have a follow-up as well?
Yes, you can, but I think Mr. Erskine-Smith wants to answer too.
You can you can fire away with your follow-up, and I'll chime in afterwards.
Sure. It's actually for you or Mr. Morrice as well, just sort of on the procedural side of things here. I'm sure you anticipated this question. We're coming up on the rise of Parliament for the summer break, and obviously a frequent criticism from opposition parties is that the Liberals tend to table bills toward the tail end of sittings before breaks or obviously before elections at times as well. I guess my question is just, what's the level of openness from within your caucus to push this through ASAP? I heard Mr. Morrice kind of reference the false statement as a way to show that the government is serious about this, and I think you may have mentioned the budget. But I'd just like to know about other efforts to kind of test the urgency here.
Sure. So I'd say a few different things. One, Mike and I spearheaded an effort on the House of Commons side to encourage members of Parliament to call for the retabling of this legislation on an expedited basis. And I can say that I think it was upwards of 40 colleagues of mine from the Liberal caucus signed on to it. It is a core concern of our caucus without question. And I say that in part because of the leadership of Minister Qualtrough to make it a priority in our caucus and to make sure it's a priority of this government. And so I take the point about tabling legislation before the election. And so that's why it was so critical for us to see this legislation tabled early in this Parliament, knowing that we have stability in this Parliament to see this through. And the goal now ought to be consultations don't need to wait for the legislation. The goal now is to ensure that the details are delivered in a really serious way, because to your previous question, the devil is in the details in terms of who is eligible, what is the initial amount, what is the clawback rate. What we know is it's to be modeled on GIS. So we have a general sense, but that is only a general sense. And so we all need to make sure that we are advocating for the details to be delivered on in the most ambitious way possible. And my own view of the timeline would be that it's our job to expedite this legislation through the House and the Senate. It is the government's job in a parallel track to ensure that consultation is fulsome with organizations and those who represent people with disabilities and those people with lived experience and people with disabilities. And ultimately, I would expect fall economic statement, if the timeline works, my expectation is that based on conversations that I've had previously and via the All-Party Anti-Poverty Caucus, I mean, my expectation is that we have to really lean in hard across party lines and across chambers to ensure that we see this benefit through in a really ambitious way in Budget 2023. And if we could do it in the fall economic statement, all the better, of course. But I think there's an opportunity here, and we have to seize the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you for the question. It really gets to the heart of this conversation this afternoon. And I believe Michelle said it best, that while Parliament may take a recess, those living in poverty do not. And so we know the momentum is there. It's 103 parliamentarians from all parties who've made clear their public support for the reintroduction of the Canada Disability Benefit. 43 senators, thanks to Senators Pate and Petitclerc, for their efforts to see the Senate speak with the extent of their support. A few weeks ago, a unanimous consent motion went through the House, where the House called on the government to reintroduce the Canada Disability Benefit without delay. And so now it's on all parliamentarians to work together and to continue to put pressure on this government to follow through to ensure that this time it must be different, that this is not a political game with people's lives, and that this benefit will be realized as soon as possible. That's what we will all continue to push for.
Thank you.
This concludes the press conference. Ceci met fin à la conférence de presse. Merci.
Oh, no, that's okay.
Merci.